And now for something completely different.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sometimes we feel like we have to mentor or guide the opposition members through the numbers in a budget because based on the questions they ask, clearly they struggle to understand how the economy works. The question of alternate reality has come up in the chamber a number of times, and based on what I hear from members opposite, I reside in an alternate universe from those across the aisle. Following are a few statements that display the profound lack of awareness by members opposite on how the economy works, and clear statements of exuberant imagination by the member from Rosemont, who is the finance critic, that display a complete lack of awareness of where money comes from and where it goes, and what the value of those spends are in the economy. The CRA is no cost to us, he said. I think there's one taxpayer, and I think the CRA does cost us some money. There's no money for family doctors, he said. I think there's a $6.8 billion budget this year for health care, and I'm sure there's a few dollars in there for family health care. In fact, I think there's a lot of money in there for family health care. The biggest cut in per student funding, he said. There's a $4 billion budget for student funding this year, or for education. The new online school that nobody asked for, the member just referred to that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm going to deal with that specific issue a little bit later. And more lately, he said, we need to get the economy back on its feet. Well, clearly they're not paying attention, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The member from Sask Rivers, I'm going to be an equal opportunity critic here. The member from Sask Rivers last week was advocating for a $37 million reduction in municipal revenue sharing. She was calling for a reduction in PST, and we all know that PST, a portion of PST is directly paid to municipal revenue. Their collective lack of awareness of the impact of droughts, market conditions as a result of the war in Europe, and the residue from the recent pandemic further shows that they have no idea what Saskatchewan people deal with. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what do the following communities have in common? Moose Jaw, Prince Albert, Lloydminster, Yorkton, Swift Current, North Battleford, Warman, Weyburn, Estevan, Martinsville, Melfort, LaRange, Humboldt, Meadow Lake, and White City. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the population of Saskatchewan has grown by the combined population of these communities since we were given the honour of forming government. Hear, hear. Obviously, that will create opportunities for more services in health, education, law enforcement, and municipal infrastructure. And of course, there are challenges. The professionals needed to provide services take time to train, graduate, go through the residency requirements, get appropriate credentials, etc. It's absolutely mind-boggling that members opposite and their sponsoring organizations think that these folks just magically appear in an incredibly competitive national environment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, provincial budgets are about big numbers. $1 billion here, $1 billion there, a few $100 million in another ministry or crown. Frankly, most of us can lose track of what it all means to you and me as individual citizens in Saskatchewan. Let's see if we can break it down a bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about money and a bit about the numbers around the budget, and then I'd like to address a few more issues raised by members opposite. Mr. Deputy Speaker, money is a medium of exchange and generally represents the relative value of goods and services in a market-based economy at a point in time. So what does that mean? Well, money made it possible to store value and allow exchanges to be independent of time.
Hear, hear.
Historically, in a barter economy, transactions needed to be done by exchanging goods and services in real time, with the exception that mutual trust could allow exchanges to become independent of time. As a result, we had the creation of money. This allows us to buy and sell goods and services without the issues of time and trust. Money became the tool to settle agreements. You and I use money every day. More recently, money is exchanged by electronic means like debit and credit cards, online banking, and e-transfers. The provincial government, and frankly all governments, rely on you, the taxpayer, to create the money through economic activity necessary to pay for services you and I need and want. Members opposite think that money grows on trees. But the reality is that everything we do, and I repeat, everything as your government, is entirely dependent on you, the taxpayer, entrusting us with your money to work with you to build the economy and its benefits for you. For clarity, you, the taxpayer, includes individuals, businesses, users of government services and resources, and it is you, the taxpayer, that creates the economy through the exchange of money. Governments, with the exception of our current federal government supported by the NDP, should have no role in a market-based economy in creating money. But that's a subject to a whole other conversation. We'll watch with interest tomorrow's federal budget to see if the NDP leader, Jagmeet, is singing his new favorite hit, I'm a believer in just inflation. We as your government only have 4 tools to work with in managing a budget. The first is federal transfers, which we have no control over. These include things like the health dollars transferred under interprovincial agreements. We can use tax tools, which means that we get money either through personal or corporate taxes, royalties, provincial sales tax, or fees like licenses, power, energy, phone bills, park entry fees, and so on. Alternatively, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we can borrow money. Historically, we've borrowed money from you, the taxpayer, through instruments like provincial savings bonds. But now we typically borrow on the open market through bonds and other debt instruments. It's very important to note that we must have a strong economy in order to get good interest rates. This is no different than you and I. If we don't have a good job or assets and a good credit history, we will have to pay higher interest rates. Today, because of the strength of our economy, we have the significant advantage of an excellent credit rating, which gives us that access to excellent borrowing rates. Mr. Deputy Speaker, debt includes short-term operations debt and capital investment supported by long-term debt. Think about operations borrowing like a credit card or a revolving line of credit, and think of capital borrowing like a mortgage or bond. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm reminded of an old statement: debt is not your friend. And the management of debt and the correct relationship between what you own and what you owe is critical to your success as an individual and to us as a province. Our debt must relate to added value in the economy and improve our ability to expand our GDP, which is the sum total of all economic activity in the province. For example, short-term debt might be payroll, while long-term might be for hospitals, schools, or highways, power lines, or cell towers. You wouldn't want to be making payroll with a new mortgage debt, and you wouldn't want to build a highway with your credit card. Members opposite often raise the issue of too much debt. What they don't understand is that we are building that much-needed infrastructure to support a growing Saskatchewan. We need to understand that the NDP never worried about this because more people were leaving the province than coming in, so expanding facilities wasn't part of their thought process. On that point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a few points of statistical interest given the opposition's fixation on their interpretation of numbers. They've been criticizing the government about immigration and interprovincial movement of people, so I thought I'd look back. According to Statistica, an independent global portal of data, which has detailed data for the past 20 years, the average number of out-migration under the NDP in Saskatchewan from 2000 to 2006 was 7,248 per year. The average number of out-migration under the Saskatchewan Party government in Saskatchewan from 2007 to 2022 is 3,075 per year. Clearly, fewer moving out on average than under the NDP. Hold on, there's more. More importantly, and this is why we're growing so quickly, The total number of immigrants to Saskatchewan under the NDP from 2000 to 2006,
How many?
11,315. That's the total number. The number of immigrants to Saskatchewan in the last year, 16,281. Or over the equivalent last 6 years, 82,202, including the 2 COVID years. That's more. So more on where the money goes on your behalf through financing initiatives. Our investments of $422.3 million in highways, $204.5 million in hospitals, $147.4 million in schools, $348 million in transfers to towns and RMs for streets, water and sewer, equipment, and many other community needs is in part on borrowed money. So is that good debt? Can you put a value on a hospital or a highway? Would you rather pay for a long-term value of a hospital this year out of your taxes? Let's use a bit of common sense. Growing a business or a province is likely to require some debt. The third tool governments have is to adjust the level of services provided. In other words, if we have a strong balance sheet, we can invest in staffing and operating hospitals, schools, highways, and many other things, including pensions and benefits for those workers in the public service. Just like you, though, we must be very careful that we don't bite off more than we can chew. If we earn $60,000 and get a $3,000 bonus, we probably shouldn't commit to that shiny new truck and camper. The same applies to government. If we don't see certainty in our forecast, we must be very careful in creating long-term obligations that we can't afford. So short-term revenue from high oil or potash prices must be taken in the context of sustainability. If your job is dependent on your company doing business with solid partners, you can have some comfort that your employer can continue to pay you. The same applies to this government. We are an export-based economy. Most of what we produce, oil and gas, potash, uranium, ag products, forestry products, machinery, is sold to our international trading partners. That is why we work hard to build good relationships around the world so we can have a reliable, long-term certainty, and again, this allows us to have more certainty in our budgets. As 2017 showed us, you always have to try to plan for tough times when a global market fails. 2020 and 2021 were further examples. That is why, in part, we made structural changes in our budget in 2017-18, which were difficult at the time, but have proven to give us a much more stable planning environment. Another fact is that most of our trade is done in US dollars, so the exchange rate very much affects our budget. We have an amazing finance ministry and finance minister that balance all of these things each and every day. So in summary, a budget is about your money. It's a snapshot at a day and time of what we think is going to happen in the future based on months of research, planning, and analysis. Ministries, agencies, crown corporations, and many stakeholders provide input. Treasury Board gathers and assesses that input, and Finance Ministry officials put it together so we, the taxpayers, can see where the money comes from and where it goes. So let's break down some of the things that are important to you and me in our daily lives. In December, we had 22,455 job vacancies in the province, which is likely similar today. In fact, a quick survey of my local small towns tells me that there were 50 to 60 jobs open in my immediate surrounding communities. Full employment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is historically seen to be about 4%. In other words, at any given time, about 4% of the population is not working for any number of reasons. They may be moving, changing careers, going back to school, temporarily laid off, or any of a dozens of other circumstances. We are at 4.3%, which suggests that virtually everyone that wants a job can get one in their chosen field. It also clearly tells us that this is no different from much of North America. that we all need people. We need those who chose early retirement due to the pandemic to come back to the workforce. We need the young and old sitting on the sidelines to get engaged in the economy. We need immigration control, and thus our desire to get the federal government out of the way so we can grow our economy. Changing the subject a bit, Mr. Speaker, I have to read a couple of things into the record. And please bear with me for a second.
Absolutely.
Quote, Sun hosted a press conference releasing the shocking results from a survey we conducted and the need for 600 more RNs and RPNs in the province. End quote. A second quote, the need for recruiting and retaining registered nurses, including RPNs, in Saskatchewan became a hot issue on the floor of the Legislative Assembly. End quote. A third quote, throughout this meeting it became evident that the Department of Health is not willing to work with Sun at this time. End quote. So why would I bring these quotes to this debate? Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, they came from the Saskatchewan Union of Nurses' summary of their actions in 2006. Mr. Deputy Speaker, every government has human resource challenges, and perspective is critical. Mr. Deputy Speaker, grandstanding by the members opposite, patting themselves on the back and boasting about a couple of dozen rural meetings they've had is insulting to the people of Saskatchewan. They come away thinking they have the solutions all figured out from a couple hours here and there. Members on this side hold regular meetings with healthcare workers, municipal governments, stakeholders, businesses, and citizens. We live in those communities, and we deal with the same issues as our constituents each and every day.
Hear, hear.
I dare say there are collective thousands of hours with stakeholders on this side. This is not a drop-in meeting, as we all have family and friends that work in healthcare, education, social services, and policing. We talk about these issues at coffee shops and kitchen tables every single day. We travel the highways and grid roads every day. Some of us are small-town business people, some are farmers, some are nurses, and some are educators. This is our life and our home. We meet with and sit beside the ministers every day. We talk about the issues and look for solutions that will work for everyone. Mr. Deputy Speaker, new healthcare facilities will be creative in treatment options and will be better positioned to triage mental health, addictions, acute and primary care needs. These new facilities, initially in Regina and Saskatoon, will take significant pressure off of our existing facilities. On education, a couple of things are front and center in my mind. I'm particularly excited about the opportunities that the new Sask DLC Distance Learning Initiative provides. I've long been an advocate for giving every student, and in fact every citizen, an opportunity for equal access to the highest levels of education and to the best teaching resources available. I fully expect this will be an indispensable addition to our education system. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our social safety nets are built around the concept that respect the integrity of the individual, the human value of dignity, the fundamental principle that everyone can rise up in the morning and be the best person they can be that day. A hand up is far more valuable than a handout. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this budget, one thing of note is the $400 million and 3% lift for CBOs. This is really important to local organizations helping people reach their potential, like POP in Porcupine Plain or Mallard in Wadena. On our economy, I must highlight the recent announcement of the formal signing of a deal between Cameco and Ukraine that will provide up to 70 million pounds of Saskatchewan uranium over 12 years. This deal alone is worth billions to the Saskatchewan economy and will significantly stabilize Ukraine's power needs for generations. Additionally, the recent acquisition of Westinghouse Electric by Cameco puts another piece directly in the supply chain agreement on this deal. Last week, I spoke of the new partnerships between BHP and local First Nations. It's important to note that throughout this budget, there are numerous initiatives for existing and new partnerships development between First Nations, Métis, municipal and provincial governments. Here's a few highlights from the Ministry of Highways that affect us, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We're getting work done on number 23, and you're very familiar with that piece of highway, Mr. Deputy Speaker, between Porcupine Plain and Carigana. Significant work there this year. We're getting passing lanes and the widening of number 5 East, which is continuing, and it's been ongoing for some time. But that makes a significant difference to all of us from East Central Saskatchewan. There's $15 million in the budget for municipal roads and bridges. There's $6 million for northern forestry roads, and some of us who have been up in the far north will really appreciate that investment. There's $5 million for winter road maintenance, $19.7 million for intersection safety projects. There's $62.8 million for 14 more bridges and 100 culverts across the province. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are investments that affect all of us in the traveling public every single day. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are a few things that kind of get lost in the numbers, but I want to mention them. There's $3.9 million of annual investment to SARM for the rat control program, the invasive plant control program, the beaver control program, and plant health network and new gopher control program. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are really important on-the-ground investments in rural Saskatchewan. There's the SLIM, or Saskatchewan Lean Improvement Manufacturing, 3-stream approach, providing funding for $750,000 for value-added production, efficiency, and emission reduction initiatives. There's a 35% increase in funding for the Métis Development Fund, providing equity for Métis businesses, loan support to community economic development initiatives, and assistance for Métis business owners and entrepreneurs to develop management skills. There's an additional $42.5 million to reduce surgical wait list, which affects all of us in this room because we all have friends or family who are waiting for hip or knee surgeries or eye surgeries and any number of other things. There's a highway preservation project from Tisdale to Elfrost that affects us, and another one east from Wadena towards Invermay. And there's also significant improvements to the highways around Yorkton as a result of the significant expansion of grain handling capacity in that area. There's the consolidation of the elementary and high schools in Kelvington and much better utilization of the facilities there. There's $4 million investment in targeted mineral exploration incentive and an increase in the Saskatchewan mineral exploration tax credit from 10 to 30%, as we've identified that Saskatchewan is home to 23 of 31 critical minerals that will be the foundation of future technology driving environmental innovation. There's a recommitted funding for the volunteer firefighting school in Melville. There are the crime reduction and warrant enforcement teams, and we all know that we have significant issues around crime across Saskatchewan, and I think these are really important programs that are going to make some difference in that area. There's an increase of 6,000 more surgeries to a number of 103,000 surgeries to be performed this year. There's a $7 million increase in funding for medical imaging, and we know how important that is in terms of triaging and appropriately treating people. This budget could have simply been titled More. There's more for everybody. There's more across the board for every ministry, for every agency. There's more for the people of Saskatchewan. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in summary, the budget reflects where we stand as a province today. The money coming in, going out, is not the government's money, nor does it grow on trees. It is the hard-earned dollars of the citizens of Saskatchewan, and we have an obligation to respect that fact. The taxpayer is a person who, as much as possible, should have choices in how they spend their money, and our role is to provide the services needed in a modern society, providing a level of certainty and policy that both protects the province's responsibilities and getting out of the way so workers and businesses can be successful. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I lived in Alberta as a result of opportunity in the 1980s and 90s. The most asked question on the street in business and in social environments was inevitably, what part of Saskatchewan are you from? As the Premier said last week, the oft-used phrase was, will the last one out turn out the lights? Mr. Deputy Speaker, those were the days of NDP governments, and I and my colleagues, and frankly the people of Saskatchewan, never want to go back to those dark, negative days.
Here, here.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, before I close, I want to take a moment to thank our constituency assistants and ministry staff for the work they do. Often they are the proverbial front line in handling sometimes tragic and challenging situations, and the work they do in moving issues and opportunities forward should never be underestimated. My CA, Chris, and all CAs have had incredibly difficult conversations over the past 2.5 years through COVID, and we owe them a great deal of thanks. There are always those who have no idea what our offices deal with or who are quick to judge our value, but I will proudly stand in this chamber and say that the most gratifying moments we have are in the situations where we have collectively made a difference for each and every citizen we work with daily. Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this budget that highlights growth that works for everyone in Saskatchewan. And I will be supporting the motion by the Minister of Finance, and I will not be supporting the amendment by the member from Regina Rosemont. Thank you.
Here, here.